There are more and more signs every day that spring is truly on its way. Mostly on its way to across the street from our house because they get full sun all day and they already have crocuses and other cute little flowers sprouting up in their front yard, and it's just so beautiful. Not so much over here yet, but it's coming. It's coming. I went for a walk today in the neighborhood and I saw little buds and little flowers and little plants sprouting up from the earth, and it gave me hope that this dark, heavy, long winter is gonna lift soon. I was gonna post a Cabane Sucre recipe today, but that just makes me think about snow, and I don't want to think about snow today. Snow is definitely coming back, and I know that. And maybe then I'll feel more in the mood to share maple syrup, taffy, and warm, cozy comfort foods. But today it really feels like spring outside. It's just incredible. I didn't even need to wear a jacket. I was wearing my brand new running shoes that I got. I got running shoes. I haven't worn running shoes outside since before I broke my ankle last July. It was so amazing, that feeling to go outside in actual shoes today. It was incredible. No snow recipes today, only recipes that really remind me of spring. Well, one recipe I'm going to share. And it's something I make often in the spring, actually. It's a pie made with an olive oil crust, and it is packed with beautiful, iron-rich, delicious, healthy greens and some pine nuts and some raisins and chili flakes. Well, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show it to you. But Erbazzone, or a greens pie, just really reminds me of spring. Maybe next week we'll get into the snow-inspired comfort foods again, but for today, no, not for today.
I start with about 6 cups of tipo 00 flour, and I make a well in the middle of it, and I pour my aquafaba in the middle. Traditionally, this recipe calls for eggs, and I'm using aquafaba, or the liquid from chickpeas, instead. The recipe also calls for about a cup of olive oil, and I will tell you that it takes an enormous amount of patience, but you need to mix it in very gently and slowly. It also calls for a few tablespoons of water. This is a hot water crust, so I'm not using ice water as I usually would. I'm using a very warm water to keep the oil from congealing. It's still going to be really flaky, I promise you. If you don't overknead it, you'll have beautiful flakiness, but it'll be a much thicker, heartier crust than you would use if you're making a delicate fruit pie or something like that, for example. This is going to be a deep dish, rustic, savory pie. There are so many greens that you can choose from for this pie. I often use chard and dandelion greens, and sometimes I'll use spinach and kale. It just depends on what you like, what's in season, what's available to you. Just keep in mind the amount of time that each of your greens takes for cooking. So for example, the chard that I'm using and the beet greens that I'm using, I can saute pretty quickly in a pan, but the dandelion greens, because they're quite tough, I'm gonna boil them for about 6 or 7 minutes first before I add them to the saute pan. In this pie, I used red onion. You could use any onion that you want to, of course. but I used red onion, and I'm using sultana raisins. If I'd had currants in the house, I probably would have used those, but any raisins will work. I'm using pine nuts and chili flakes and a mix of olives. I have Kalamata olives and Italian green olives. And all I'm doing with those is just giving them a little squish to pull the pit out and then chopping them very roughly. I'm not even chopping them very small. I like to get little bites of olive that I can actually taste. I saute the onions and garlic in some olive oil, and as soon as they start to get a little bit tender, I am going to also introduce the pine nuts and the chili flakes, the olives, it's a lot of greens. I'm telling you, however much you think you need way more than that, because they cook down way smaller than they were. And so I add a little bit at a time so it doesn't all come flying out of the pan. And I add the cooked spinach about 10 minutes in, so I'll make sure that all the other greens are nicely sauteed, and then I'll add the spinach greens for the last 5 or 6 minutes. And then I will add what I use instead of Parmesan cheese in a lot of recipes, which is a combination of cashews and nutritional yeast and garlic, granulated garlic, all ground up together. So I'll add some of that as well and mix it together and set it aside to cool. While that's cooling, I will pull out my dough from the fridge and divide it in two, and I will roll out a circle big enough to fit into a 9 to 10 inch springform pan, and make sure that the dough comes all the way up over the edges. And then I will fill that with my greens mix, and then I will roll out the other half of the dough to make the lid. And I will definitely have some left over, which I will use to make lettuce or some kind of ornamental design for the top of my pie. And sometimes there's still some left over, which I'll use to make a quiche a different day. Once the edges of the pie are all well pinched together, I will oil the top of the pie gently with a bit of olive oil and put that in the oven to bake for about 50 minutes to an hour until the crust is nice and golden on top. And then serve it quite warm, not hot, but warm, at least room temperature, probably a little bit warmer even. But honestly, you can eat it cold if you really want to. It's so delicious. I love this pie. And I hope you do too. If you try it, please let me know in the comments below.
Thank you so much for watching this video. As always, it means so much to me. It really does. And if you are a Patreon subscriber, I cannot thank you enough for believing in this work, for being a part of it, contributing to it, and helping to make it possible. And if you'd like to work one-on-one with me for nutrition or naturopathy, there is a booking link in the description below.
Thank you again. I will see you next week. And in the meantime, take really good care of yourselves.